I knew the knife was coming, just not when she'd twist it. I was mid-sentence, slide 3, discussing the operational integrity risks of uncoordinated role revocations, when she leaned forward like a cat about to pounce. "Thank you, we're done here," she said, voice smooth, saccharine, and final. "Security will walk you out." A little too rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror with her corporate smile and PowerPoint swagger. The board just sat there, like mannequins. No shock, no movement, not even a head tilt from Elliot, who knew Clause 8.2 by heart because we'd written it together last spring during the audit prep cycle. I held his gaze for a half second. He blinked. That was enough. I didn't argue, I didn't stall. I removed my badge, gray plastic, magnetic strip half scuffed from a decade of swipes, and set it on the polished walnut, right in front of her untouched kale salad. Then I said it, calm as a shut door. "You might want to check your inbox. The board's reconvening in 90 minutes. And then I walked out. Before we go on, if you've made it this far, take a second to hit subscribe and like the video. 97% of people don't, and it really helps the team keep this project going. It means a lot. Back to the story. The thing about systems integrity is that it's never the flashy stuff that saves you. It's the guardrails no one sees, the background protocols, the buried lines in the policy stack. She came in like a TED Talk that wouldn't end. High heels clicking through a tea like she was stepping over puddles. Day 1, she ordered a reorg before she even met the ops leads. Day 2, she called our documentation excessive. By day 4, she'd told the infrastructure team that legacy holdovers would be phased out. I was the longest running holdover in that building, 13 years. I'd onboarded 5 CFOs and survived 3 restructuring attempts. I didn't outlast them by luck. I outlasted them because I built the very thing they didn't bother to read. Slide 3, cut off mid-sentence, was the fuse. Operational integrity dependencies, see 8.2 of board policy. She hadn't read 8.2. Nobody ever did. That was the point. Clause 8.2 wasn't public. It wasn't on the general board packet. It was quietly inserted into the systems continuity addendum after the near-miss incident of Q3 last year, the one where a temp fired the wrong endpoint and almost took out a federal pipeline. After that, the board authorized me to implement lockout conditions in case of role termination without procedural review. They trusted me, silently, because I never made noise. I made systems. And now the new VP, fresh from some Silicon Valley culture experiment, had just walked into a glass-walled room and publicly fired the custodian of the lockout clause on live projection. I reached the parking lot and opened my phone. One new notification. Custodian ID removed. Emergency protocol initialized. Session timeout 01:30:02. It had begun. I sat in my car and let the silence fill the space. No tears, no panic, just breath. One deep inhale, the kind you take before a windstorm hits. They thought it was over. It was just starting. She walked into that building like she owned air rights over common sense. You know the type. Talks about agile evolution and disruption in the same sentence without a trace of irony. First meeting, she used the phrase fast-track innovation pipelines and looked around like she'd just discovered fire. That's when I knew we were on borrowed time. She skipped orientation, said she didn't need it, skipped systems briefings, said she'd get the gist from summaries. She wanted glossy dashboards and clean executive summaries, not the spider web of safeguards and redundancies that actually kept the company upright. She skipped the meeting where I explained why our data centers still had isolated fallback modes. Skipped the presentation on why certain repositories were mirrored but not synced in real time. Skipped the part where I said plainly, I am both the architect and the custodian. Remove one and you risk the other. But when a woman like her skips, it's not oversight. It's arrogance on autopilot. Our lead developer flagged the concern after she cut his access request to the legacy vault. She told him it was bloatware. Just yesterday, she told the compliance liaison to streamline the noise, which, translated, meant delete every document that didn't come with a chart and a bullet point. The thing is, Clause 8.2 wasn't noise, it was the lever, and it was already embedded. Last April, we almost lost everything because an interim contractor terminated access credentials during an asset transfer window. Took us 17 hours to roll back the breach. 17 hours of silent failure almost undetected because no one thought to question a routine removal. That Monday, the board asked me, how do we prevent that again? I gave them a draft. Clause 8.2, quietly adopted, quietly buried. It was simple. Any removal of the designated operations architect without 48-hour review and transition plan approval initiates a temporary systems lockdown pending a mandatory board reconvening. No sabotage, no deletion, just lockout, until quorum restored. But here's the part she never knew. The clause wasn't just passive. It was hard-coded with a trigger. When my ID was revoked, a webhook activated, pinging our secure ops array and shifting system credentials into custodian protocol. All non-critical systems were paused. Core data pipelines dropped to read-only, and production environments entered timed suspension. She thought she'd fired a problem. What she actually did was pull the one pin holding up the circus tent. I kept walking to my car. Traffic hummed. Clouds rolled flat above the lot. I didn't rush. No need. Her clock had started. 90 minutes. That's all they had. Then the systems would enter recursive stasis, waiting for either my biometric override or a board-certified successor. She wasn't either. And the board? They hadn't even gotten the notification yet. But they would, in about 60 more seconds. By the time I hit the second floor of the parking deck, the webhook had already done its job. Ping received, authorization transferred, backup array lit green across all 6 mirrors, then spun up the failover environments like it had rehearsed this moment its whole digital life. Because it had. We tested it quarterly. No one ever noticed, because the best defense is the one no one sees, until they hit it face first. On my dash, my tablet blinked awake. A single line across the terminal screen. Custodian mode, active. Session, timeout, 01:30:02. I watched the countdown begin, just a normal timer to anyone else. But to me, that number was a blade descending, millimeter by millimeter, toward the neck of an overconfident regime. This wasn't retaliation. This was protocol. The ops environments were already shifting. Not crashing, just entering read-only. You could see the data, sure, pull reports, feel the hum of a working system, but you couldn't push, couldn't deploy, couldn't override workflows. They'd have 90 minutes of illusion, just enough time to hang their own lanyards on a hook and declare victory. Then the lights would stop blinking, one by one. The only environment still writable was the custodian console, isolated, biometric locked, accessible from one location and one set of hands, mine. They wouldn't even know they'd lost control until the first DevOps lead tried to push to prod and got the denial, until their CI/CD pipeline hit the wall and came back empty, until someone noticed Jenkins had quietly gone mute, not failed, not crashed, just fallen respectfully silent. Inside, she was probably still making her rounds, smiling too wide, congratulating herself on decisive leadership. Making eye contact like she expected a standing ovation. She'd probably use phrases like culture shift and modern energy before the hour was out. That hour, already dying. Terminal logs updated, custodian ID mismatch, quorum override required. That's when the magic happens. The system checks itself, notices the architect is gone, searches for quorum, fails, then, per clause 8.2, it requires a reconvened board majority and my biometric key, voice print, retinal, and a fallback security phrase. Without those, the system wouldn't crash. It would wait. Because the system doesn't panic. The system does exactly what I built it to do. I sat in my car and watched the sun slide higher over the edge of the building, tapped once on the terminal, then closed the lid. No need to monitor every blink. They'd feel it soon enough, and when they did, they wouldn't be able to call IT. Because IT didn't have the keys. I did. They brought in charcuterie trays, shrimp cocktail. Someone even managed to get Prosecco instead of the usual corporate sparkling cider. Like this was the christening of a new era. Plastic flutes clinked over paper plates while she stood at the head of the conference table like a cruise director who just tossed the old captain overboard. "Today marks a shift," she declared, grinning like a woman who'd just cleaned house and wanted applause for using scented bleach. A modern approach to team accountability, a fresh strategy, no more bloat, no more bottlenecks. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room had watched me place my badge on the table 2 hours earlier like I was laying down a queen in a quiet game of chess. And now they were pretending it was over, that the cleanup crew had rolled through and leadership had prevailed. She raised her glass. "To lean systems and cleaner code." They cheered. Mid-toast, someone from DevOps, Thomas, I'd bet, leaned in close to the infrastructure lead and muttered something. His brow furrowed. A second later, he lifted his phone, tapped twice, and whispered, Some of our sessions just flip to read only. Jenkins can't push to prod. She didn't even blink. Probably an expired token or a stale cache. Recycle the container. She said it like it was a spell, like saying recycle the container could fix a growing mountain of denial. Except I'd revoked the recycle authority 30 seconds after the custodian protocol activated. That wasn't a hiccup. That was a curtain closing. Slowly, silently, with velvet precision. Jenkins wasn't the only one frozen. The staging pipeline was suspended, critical deploy permissions were revoked. Patch management shifted into observation only. The CI/CD monitor in the corner flickered once, then displayed a message none of them recognized. Quorum lock engaged, custodian signature missing. Thomas frowned. This isn't a crash, it's a hold. Still, she waved it off. Probably something legacy, she said, biting into a cracker like she was too evolved to be concerned. We'll fix it after the stand-up. Run diagnostics, clear the logs, standard post-transition stuff. Only it wasn't. Because every diagnostic was routed through the same checkpoint, the custodian console, the one no one else could access, the one that would go fully dark in under 45 minutes if nothing changed. Back in my apartment, I stirred cream into my coffee and glanced at the timer. 00:45:17, they weren't panicking yet. Not because the system was fine, but because it had the decency to fail politely, to fail with a smile. With green lights still blinking and dashboards that hadn't yet updated the full cascade. They'd see it soon, but not before she'd posed for photos beside a screen that no longer told the truth. Not before she handed out tiny bottles of hand sanitizer labeled New Era, Clean Start. Not before the codebase froze beneath her feet like a lake pretending it wasn't cracking. At exactly 12:28 p.m., the main dashboard collapsed like a stage curtain yanked mid-scene. No warning, no fade-out. One moment, the ops display was glowing with false confidence. Green bars, healthy load balance, heartbeat pings ticking like lullabies. The next, gray, then black. Then the rotating ring of death we all dread. The one that doesn't mean reboot, but reconsider your decisions. A full minute later, at 12:29, Slack started stuttering. Messages failed to send. Threads hung mid-conversation like ghosts in a hall. Someone tried to schedule a sync call and the calendar API failed with a 503. By the time they noticed, it was too late. At 12:30, the heartbeat stopped. Not a crash, a freeze. Total production lockout. Pipelines dead mid-deploy. Repos unreachable. Sandboxes preserved like they'd been cryogenically sealed. A single message displayed across every internal monitor, server dashboard, and dev terminal in stark, unapologetic text. Custodian absent. System frozen per clause 8.2, contact board chair. And just like that, every smile in that building fell off like cheap makeup in the rain. She turned white. Real white. Not theatrical embarrassment, not a PR oops, bone white panic, because in that second, she realized this wasn't a bug. This wasn't a misfire. This was a deliberate, procedural lockout, and she had no idea what to do next. She scrambled into the hallway, heels too loud, voice too shrill. "Where's the CTO? Why isn't this resolved?" Someone whispered. "He's in the East Suite." She ran, opened the door hard enough it bounced back and hit the wall. "Why is the entire system frozen? We need rollback access. Tell Jenkins to restart." He didn't even look up from his screen, just reached for a mug and took a slow sip. "Only she can unlock it," he said flatly. "She? Who the hell is she?" He met her eyes for the first time. "You fired her 2 hours ago." There was a long pause. She blinked once. "The systems architect?" He nodded. "And custodian." Her mouth opened slightly, lips forming a question but never delivering it. Because she didn't even know my last name, never bothered to learn it. I'd been a footnote to her, a checkbox, a legacy system with legs. Back in my apartment, I sipped jasmine tea and opened my laptop. One unread email had just triggered delivery. Subject: Custodian protocol triggered at 11 a.m. System log plus audit trail enclosed. Sent directly to the board. No theatrics, no commentary, just evidence. Clause 8.2, time-stamped, verified, activated. They couldn't plead ignorance now. The system had spoken, and it only answered to one voice. At 12:37 p.m., the email came through like a storm warning. Subject: Emergency board session, 1 o'clock p.m. Ops integrity breach. No preamble, no pleasantries. Just the line that always follows arrogance too far. We need to talk. I didn't rush. I showered, changed into a fresh blouse, packed a printed copy of Clause 8.2 in a slim folder, and highlighted 3 lines in yellow, just in case anyone suddenly wanted to pretend they hadn't seen it before. I arrived 10 minutes early. The boardroom was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that follows a car accident, where everyone's still breathing, but no one knows what to say. One aide glanced up at me, wide-eyed, like I'd returned from the dead. I nodded at her. She blinked twice and looked away. The VP was already there, flushed, hands shaking just slightly as she whispered into her phone by the window, back turned, voice tight and low and panicked. Probably some PR lifeline or external consultant she thought could magic her out of a self-dug hole. The chair looked up, spotted me, and immediately motioned her to stop. "Ms. Hale," he said, not unkindly, but with clipped precision, "please end your call. We're reconvened." She hesitated like she wanted to argue, but didn't. She tapped the screen, shoved the phone into her bag, and sat stiffly, crossing her legs like it gave her some imaginary leverage. Then the chair turned to me. "You warned us," he said, voice lower now. Not performative, just honest. "We didn't listen." He gestured to the display screen behind him. Static, error code blinking faintly in the corner, a countdown running beneath it. "Can you restore it?" I didn't move right away, just set the folder down, took a breath, let the silence work for me the way it always had. "I can," I said, "but there's a condition." Several heads turned. The general counsel sat up straighter. I reached into the folder and slid the highlighted copy of Clause 8.2 across the table. "You allowed this to be activated. Now you'll allow it to be expanded." The CTO let out a breath, not resistance, just quiet realization. He understood before anyone else did, because what they were asking for wasn't just a reset, it was a rewrite, and I wasn't handing back control without rewriting the rules first. They needed the key, but this time I wasn't leaving it under the mat. They expected negotiation. I gave them terms, not suggestions, not requests. Terms, final, non-negotiable. And I laid them out with the same precision I'd used to build the system they just tried and failed to run without me. "First," I said, "I return, not as architect, not as legacy, as systems custodian emeritus." A pause. I watched the VP flinch at the word. Emeritus meant permanent, untouchable, a fixture you didn't mess with, not without consequences. "Second," I continued, "I report directly to this board. No executive oversight, no middle management, no interpretation layers." Someone near legal opened a notebook, but didn't write, just held the pen like a white flag. "Third, the emergency lockdown protocol remains active. Clause 8.2 stays untouched, permanently embedded." The CTO nodded, slowly. He knew that part was non-negotiable. It had saved them from worse. "Fourth, no executive may override core infrastructure functions, deploy, rollback, push, revoke, or migrate without my written signature. Not digital, not delegated, mine." I saw one board member glance toward the VP. Her face had gone flat. Not combative anymore, just pale and absorbing. "Fifth, quarterly integrity reviews. I'll run them. You'll attend them. No exceptions." I let that sink in. Then I dropped the last clause. And finally, she receives weekly technical briefings from my team for 1 year, minimum. She may not skip them, defer them, or send proxies. She will learn exactly what she didn't read. That one stung. I saw it land, but no one argued, not even her. The chair folded his hands, tapped his ring against the table once, then looked to each board member in turn. All nods, silent, resigned, certain. Then he turned to her. "She'll comply," he said. No question in his voice. She didn't answer, just sat there, still. The kind of still that comes after a fall when you're not sure what hurts yet. I slid a printed copy of Clause 8.2 toward her side of the table. "For your review," I said. She stared at it, hands folded, then finally opened it, line by line, like it was written in a language she never bothered to learn, because she hadn't. She'd skimmed, skipped. Assumed authority gave her immunity, but authority, real authority, isn't given. It's architected, and I was the one who wrote the walls. At exactly 1:30 p.m., I walked back into the Network Operations Center. No fanfare, no applause. Just the hush of anticipation wrapped in hums and cooling fans, rows of monitors blinking amber in standby. The air felt charged like the seconds before a storm breaks. Everyone knowing something's coming, no one quite sure how loud it'll be. Dozens of engineers looked up as I entered. Some stood, some didn't move, one even dropped their pen. I didn't stop to explain. I didn't need to. The custodian terminal was still where I'd left it, centered, untouched, logged out, and glowing with a waiting prompt. The black screen with a single line blinking like a heartbeat. I sat down, scanned in, a quiet click, then the biometric prompt lit green. I entered 2 commands, nothing elaborate, nothing flashy, just enough to release the hold, enough to return what was never truly theirs to begin with. And then it began. One by one, the systems came back to life. Green indicators flared across the top row of the monitor stack. Load balancers reactivating, database clusters syncing, CI/CD pipelines reawakening like yawning giants. Jenkins re-engaged. The monitoring suite blinked steady and rhythmic again. I stood. The dashboard updated. Custodian protocol active. Next review, board week 3. No one said a word. They didn't need to. She was there too, standing near the glass wall, arms folded tightly across her chest, trying to shrink into a form that might survive the room. She'd watched it happen, watched the resurrection she couldn't trigger, watched the quiet ceremony of competence unspoken. I turned to her, held her gaze just long enough to be polite, but not enough to let her retreat. Next time you fire someone mid-slide, I said, voice even, not cold, just complete. Read the slides first. Then I walked out, because I didn't need to stay for the applause. I was the system now, and the system never claps. It just runs. She didn't quit. I thought she might, after the boardroom, after the silence, after the reboot that made her presence feel like background noise in a room full of people who finally understood where the center actually lived. But she stayed, only quieter. She started showing up to ops syncs, sat in the corner at first, barely speaking, just watching, listening, no interruptions, no buzzwords, just notebooks and silence. The team didn't know what to do with that version of her. Neither did I. She stopped calling the infrastructure legacy, stopped skipping technical briefs, and during one session, midway through a walkthrough on systems rollback dependencies, she raised her hand and asked, "What happens if the secondary key pair fails during a push freeze?" Thomas actually dropped his pen. She didn't smirk, didn't preen, just nodded and scribbled the answer. A real question, from someone who finally realized power isn't posture, it's access. And access, well... Her badge still didn't unlock the custodian vault. They'd offered to reinstate it. I declined. I didn't need the desk, or the title, or the reports. They gave me an office in the corner, tucked near the server rooms I designed, with glass that stayed half-frosted from age. No brass nameplate, just a label on the door. Custodian. The board didn't just keep Clause 8.2. They added Clause 9.1. No critical systems may be governed by non-technical personnel without custodian briefing certification. It passed unanimously, not because of fear, but because of memory. Memory of what it felt like to lose something no one understood until it disappeared. And me? I didn't return to lead. I returned to guard the foundation I'd built, to teach the ones who might someday hold the keys. Quietly, slowly. The way real continuity is taught, over time, through context, never through force. The lights in the NOC stayed steady now, green, predictable, trusted. And on a shelf in my apartment, above a stack of old architecture specs and audit reports, sits the badge I left on that boardroom table. Worn, bent slightly at the edge, faded ink on the back. I keep it as a reminder. Legacy isn't ego, it's insurance. Written not in ink, but in code.